Welcome to the Dark Ozarks. We are discussing screaming skulls, crossroads, and burial mounds. But first, we want to remind you that the Dark Ozarks podcast is now available on Branson Podcast Network, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or about any other podcast platform. So what do screaming skulls, crossroads, and burial mounds have to do with the Ozarks?
There are interesting threads of continuity between Old England and the Ozarks about unhappy ghosts and crossroads and burial mounds. And there's a lot of pieces to that puzzle. Settlers brought those ideas with them when they moved to the Ozarks, and the North American landscape of burial mounds and hauntings were incorporated into the lore that we still hear today.
We will return to Screaming Skulls, but first we want to invite you to like, follow, and subscribe to Dark Ozarks on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, as well as your favorite podcast platform. We also invite you to become a Dark Ozarks subscriber on Facebook. On the Dark Ozarks Facebook page, click subscribe, have your login information ready, and join Dark Ozarks behind the scenes for only $4.99 per month.
Your $4.99 per month subscription allows you to come with us on paranormal investigations, deep dive research, and topics too controversial for public view. The next 100 subscribers will be entered in a drawing for a free Dark Ozarks t-shirt and an exclusive signed first-run copy of the book Dark Ozarks, The Spooklight. Subscribe today to be entered in the drawing.
And now you can get Dark Ozarks t-shirts for sale at darkozarks.com and paranormalsciencelab.com.
We encourage you to check out Always Buying Books in Joplin, Missouri, in person and online on Facebook and at the website alwaysbuyingbooks.com for all of your reading needs, including a large section on the paranormal, history, and more. Not to mention, the building is haunted. Tell Bob and Elise that we sent you.
We also want to thank Beard Engine Brewing Company in Alba, Missouri. Beard Engine Brewing is the only English-style brewery in Missouri and has been twice named Missouri's best brewery by the Missouri Brewers Association. Great beer and great food in a historical building with a noir past. And yes, their building is also haunted. Tell Nate and Tiff that we sent you.
Skulls in the Ozarks.
Yes. You know, there's a long tradition of skulls associated with the supernatural, as well as just real life noir, but it found its way to the Ozarks in a big way, bigger than I think a lot of people probably think.
That is fair. And what is particularly fascinating and to me encouraging just from a cultural or even an anthropological standpoint is that the skull motif or the skull lore that oftentimes surfaces in the Ozarks is very much from the ground up, pun intended, very much grassroots. It is not coming from popular culture. It is coming from longstanding Celtic, particularly Celtic and Osage belief structures that then are manifesting themselves usually in times of violence and crises. But it's exciting to me to have access to this lore and in some cases just to the physical history, because it is not coming, for example, from the 1958 film The Screaming Skull. It's coming from long-standing, in some cases even pre-Columbian, or in the case of the Celts, you could say even pre-Romano beliefs.
Mm-hmm. Very true. And with certain takes and spins in different places, including rural Britain, that was the inspiration for the movie The Screaming Skull, but just not executed well in the movie.
And with that, it is also a chilling narrative on early settler culture that oftentimes gets left out. It certainly gets left out of the stalwart grandeur of the 1890s era romanticization of the proud settlers crossing the Cumberland Gap. I think you know the I'm talking about. And
Yes.
also, an interesting cross tie, unrelated to skulls, is while we see an approximately 40-year era of romanticization and grandeur of art in the United States, and I'm actually referencing several dramatic mural pieces, even mural pieces in the Jefferson City Capitol that are, I love them. I love the art that is in the Capitol at Jefferson City. But they're at the tail end of this grand art movement that you certainly see started in the golden age of the Celtic Renaissance as well, perhaps connected, perhaps not, but certainly in the 1890s, even under the auspices of Lady Grey and W.B. Yeats, you saw this vast romanticization, almost a Greco-Romanization of the Celtic motifs, the Celtic myths. And it's funny. It's not unlike the downtown Hollister, actually, in the sense about the same time. And you have this obsession with an earlier romanticized golden age that now you're recreating, but now 100 to 120 years later, it is in and of itself part of the historical narrative. So it overlaps, and you look at it and you can demean it because it's not technically accurate, but then you really can't demean it because it is now historically accurate for its own period.
Right. The earlier connections become just a bonus, so to speak. But as far as the role of skulls in the Ozarks, there are several pretty glaring examples.
Yes, there are. And I coming back to my original point of the grandeur of the art, romanticizing the early settler period, early European settler period, which I have an enormous fondness for and a deep appreciation for, because some of that was definitely my family.
Yeah, same here.
At the same time, certainly just with our comparatively minute cross sampling here with Ozarks lore, you can extrapolate out that extraordinarily heightened levels of violence would take place in ways that we would find absolutely terrifying today, and were done largely, as a matter of fact, in the 1830s, 40s, 50s, 60s.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where some of our skull lore comes from. Very
true. Even before the settlers, the Osage here were very fond of beheadings.
Yeah. And I particularly find that narrative and that historical reality very, very, first of all, fascinating, but also it leads to a much more important and I would say deeper truth when you're doing these types of cultural studies, because it's pointing to the fact that the custom process and the long lineage of narrative and history of the people groups were very unique. That you cannot look at the people groups monolithically. You have to look at them individually. And the Osage in particular had a variety of customs, viewpoints, and cosmologies that were unique to the Osage. And one of them was their penchant for beheading their enemies.
Very much so. And that ultimately ended up also including settlers and soldiers in the Indian Wars in the 1830s, as well as during the Civil War. So it's not just the settlers that engaged in it, but that certainly did happen.
And of course, our probably two favorite headless corpses stories for the Missouri Ozarks would be the bushwhacker in a villa, and of course the other bushwhacker of Taney County, Alf Bolin.
very, very true. And both during the Civil War. And I think we'll leave it there. We invite you to watch the full-length video that will be up tomorrow night and look for the connections between the beheadings in the Ozarks and Screaming Skulls, as well as Crossroads and Burial Mounds. In between, we ask you not to forget to check out upcoming events and merchandise at darkozarks.com and paranormalsciencelab.com. Thank you again to Always Buying Books and Beard Engine Brewing Company for helping to bring the Ozarks to everyone.
On the next episode, we are going to be discussing Hauntings of Joplin, Missouri, Part 2. Catch the Dark Ozarks podcast on Branson Podcast Network, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or about any other podcast platform. Thank you, everyone. And remember, there are no easy answers,